I was reborn. This time, I tore up my engagement with Captain Ryan Lawrence and married a rugged cook from the military. In my previous life, I willingly gave up my chance to enlist for Ryan, only for him to turn around and give my spot to his so-called true love, Emily Shaw. I stayed home, managing the household for him, while he and Emily basked in their romance, growing more and more distant from me. He gradually began resenting me, sending letters time and time again asking for a divorce. Later, when Ryan was injured and needed rehabilitation, I stayed by his side, helping him recover and climb out of his darkest days. But once his career took off again, he never let go of his obsession with Emily. Even my son, whom I carried for 10 months and raised with everything I had, was deemed unworthy of his lineage. His refined and wealthy father ultimately forced me out with nothing. In this life, I chose to let Ryan pursue his so-called true love while I focused on my own success. I pushed my rugged husband, Adam Carter, to enroll in military school, where he eventually became a battalion leader and later a department director. This time, I gave up the idea of enlisting. Instead, I chose to stay at the neighborhood textile factory as a worker. The community director looked at me in shock. "Jessica Carter, are you sure? This is the last enlistment slot, and it happens to be for the same unit as your fiancé. Wouldn't it be great for you two to serve together as husband and wife?" My eyes drifted toward the wall outside, where a red banner read, "One person joins the military, the whole family is honored. Protecting the country, never regretting it. Dedicate your youth to the military." At that moment, I was certain I had truly been reborn, back to the autumn of 1975, during the enlistment period. I smiled faintly and replied firmly, "Director, women can hold up half the sky now. The textile industry is a pillar of our national economy. I'm still young, I can't waste my life on love. I want to contribute to building our socialist society. In my past life, my entire existence revolved around Ryan Lawrence, yet in the end, I was left with nothing, filled with hatred as I took my last breath. Now that I have another chance, I will never marry Ryan Lawrence again." The director was moved by my words and patted my shoulder enthusiastically. "Good. The baton of this era is now in your hands. You're exceptional. I believe you'll become a role model for working women." After thanking him, I left the community office and walked through the narrow alleyway. People around me wore blue workers' uniforms, riding their sturdy bicycles. The reality of my rebirth hit me all at once, and I looked up at the sunset, unable to hold back a smile. It's not too late. This time, I will live for myself. I will create my own brilliant life. When I arrived home, the rich aroma of stewed chicken filled the air, waking my senses. Guided by the memories of my past life, I looked up toward the living room. Under the warm glow of the lamp, I saw him again, Ryan Lawrence, 40 years younger, sitting on the sofa just like before. Just as I remembered, young Ryan had deep, sharp eyes, a strong and chiseled jawline, and an intimidating presence. Even an unintentional glance from him could make my heart tremble. My cheeks flushed instantly, but a man like him never loved me. He was the youngest regiment commander in the Southern Military Region, with a bright future ahead, and I was nothing more than an ordinary textile factory worker. If my grandfather hadn't once saved his grandfather's life, how could I have ever been engaged to him? Ryan frowned slightly when he saw me standing there in a daze. Handing me a document, he said, "I retrieved the marriage request I submitted last time from the political commissar." He hesitated, as if there was more he wanted to say, but before he could continue, his mother interrupted coldly. "You should put this marriage on hold. Ryan is in the prime of his career. Young people shouldn't be caught up in romance. They should focus on strengthening national defense and ensuring the country's security." My father furrowed his brows. "What Mrs. Lawrence said isn't wrong, but Jessica is also enlisting. Wouldn't it be good for them to serve together after marriage?" His eyes were filled with concern for me. Ryan's mother, however, scoffed and said sharply, "The military isn't a place for comfort. If she goes, she'll only be a distraction to Ryan. Or do you expect him to take care of Jessica just because your family once saved ours?" Her eyes held nothing but disdain. The Lawrence family came from generations of military officers, deeply rooted in power and prestige. Naturally, his parents never approved of me, They had always been reluctant about this engagement, but because of a sense of obligation, they couldn't openly break it off. So they had stalled it until now. The marriage request in my hand, Ryan's grandfather had forced him to submit it. On my family's side, my parents bent over backward to cater to Ryan's preferences, making every decision with his approval in mind. Every move they made was cautious, fearful of upsetting him. A marriage built on such an imbalance wasn't worth keeping. Seeing me remain silent, Ryan was about to speak again, but before he could, I cut him off. I think Mrs. Lawrence is right. Marriage is a big decision. Ryan never expected me to answer this way. His eyes were filled with shock and confusion. His lips parted as if to speak but hesitated, and his brows furrowed deeply. In my past life, when Ryan had placed that retrieved marriage request in front of me, I had sobbed and begged him, and only then did he reluctantly agree to the marriage, on the condition that I stayed home to manage household affairs and take care of his parents. He promised he would convince them to accept me. I had agreed, willingly giving up my chance to enlist, but in the end he gave that last enlistment spot to his so-called true love, Emily Shaw. After we got married, Ryan's unit relocated to the south, but he refused to let me follow him. Instead, he left me behind in the north. I never complained, pouring my heart into maintaining the household. But to Ryan, my hard work and diligence became signs of crudeness. My warmth and generosity turned into recklessness. His heart and mind were filled with Emily, leaving no space for me. He grew increasingly disdainful and sent letter after letter, asking for a divorce. Then, during a military exercise, Ryan stepped on a landmine while saving Emily and suffered severe leg injuries. His future became uncertain. As a proud man, he refused to become a burden to the country, choosing to retire from service instead of taking a desk job. Meanwhile, Emily quickly turned around and accepted the pursuit of a general's son. Ryan's sudden downfall shattered him, and he never recovered. But I, despite everything, chose to stay. I learned acupuncture on my own and helped him through his rehabilitation. By the late 1980s, with the tide of economic reform, Ryan entered the business world and became a successful entrepreneur. I had thought that, after everything, I had finally won. Until the day I was alone in the hospital, tending to my critically ill mother-in-law, and I saw Ryan carefully accompanying Emily to her prenatal checkup. His gaze was filled with a tenderness I had never once seen directed at me. It was in that moment that I finally understood. Ryan had never let go of his first love. All the years I had spent enduring hardships for him, all the sacrifices I made, meant nothing to him. He had long forgotten the sleepless nights I spent by his side when he was injured, how I cared for him through his darkest days. To Ryan, my devotion had always been nothing but a burden, an inconvenience. His heart was like stone, encased in an impenetrable shell. No matter how much I gave, I could never melt it. Day by day, his coldness slowly drove me mad. Even my own son, whom I had carried for 10 months and raised with my blood, sweat, and tears, began to look down on me. He saw me as an embarrassment, someone unworthy of his elegant businessman father. "Mom, you should take a good look at yourself in the mirror," he sneered at me one day. "Do you really think you deserve my dad? Aunt Emily and Dad are the perfect couple. If it weren't for you shamelessly clinging to him all these years, they would have been together long ago." Even at his wedding, he didn't invite me. His own mother. Instead, it was Emily, the other woman, who sat in the honored seat as the groom's mother. That was the final straw. I had shielded him from the wind and rain, sacrificed everything I had for him. But in the end, my son's cruelty was the sharpest blade, cutting my heart to pieces. I hated myself. I resented how I had wasted my entire life on Ryan Lawrence, only to be left with nothing. This time, I would stay far away from Ryan. I would live for myself. Ryan didn't care about decorum anymore. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me into my bedroom, closing the door behind him. Struggling to keep his patience, he spoke in a calm voice. "Jessica, my family just thinks we're still young. There's no rush to get married. The military district is busy right now. But once things settle down, I'll submit the marriage application again. Besides, I think it's not ideal for us to be stationed in the same unit after getting married. You should reconsider enlisting." I smiled calmly and said, "No need to reconsider, Ryan. I never planned on enlisting just to be your comrade." Ryan froze, disbelief flashing across his face. He couldn't accept that I was so easily giving up what should have been a rare opportunity. With a mocking tone, he sneered, "Jessica Carter, when did you learn to play hard to get?" I simply looked at him. "I just think enlisting is a serious decision. The military isn't a place for love affairs." Ryan's words sounded righteous, but his actions told a different story. In my past life, he had used our engagement to force me into submission, only to turn around and give my enlistment spot to Emily. And now, the first thing out of his mouth was yet another excuse to stop me from joining the military. At the end of the day, it all boiled down to the same thing. He wanted me to give up my spot for his white moonlight. I was just about to tell Ryan that I wanted to break off our engagement when a loud knock sounded at the door. His mother's voice came from outside. "Ryan, it's getting late. We should be leaving. Aren't you supposed to help Emily fix her radio today?" Before we could finish our conversation, Ryan barely had time to say, "I'll come find you once I'm done," before he turned and left without looking back. I watched as his figure disappeared into the distance. I knew that tonight, I wouldn't be seeing him again. His parents had even slaughtered the chicken they had been saving for the new year to welcome him home. But none of it mattered. Once Emily was involved, he would forget about me completely. My father had woken up early to sweep the yard over and over again, ensuring that not a single leaf remained. He had even borrowed money to buy fresh slate tiles, carefully scrubbing them until they gleamed. My mother had been busier than ever, moving around like a spinning top, wiping down the wooden dining table multiple times before covering it with a floral tablecloth that she had been saving for a special occasion. The glass windows had been polished to perfection with newspaper, and the portrait of the national leader on the wall had been meticulously dusted. Yet, despite all their efforts, none of it had been enough to make Ryan stay. If Emily Shaw was around, he would always forget me. Emily had been Ryan's high school classmate, a beautiful, talented girl who could sing and dance. She was his white moonlight. Due to some unresolved family issues, she had never been able to fulfill her dream of enlisting. Recently, those problems had finally been resolved, but the last available enlistment spot had already been given to me. For Emily, Ryan would walk through fire. He would climb mountains and cross oceans. So what was forcing his nameless, unofficial fiancée to give up her enlistment slot compared to that? In my past life, Ryan had even agreed to marry me just to secure that spot for her. And in doing so, he trapped me in a life of misery. This time, I would still give the slot to Emily, not out of weakness, but because I wanted to sever all ties with Ryan. I wanted to see if, after everything, they would truly stay together for life. In the end, I left the words I had wanted to say unspoken. It didn't matter. Ryan's leave would be over in just 5 days. Emily would join the military's performance troupe as an entertainment soldier, and soon after, their unit would be relocating to the south. From then on, we would be worlds apart, and our paths would never cross again. After dinner, I didn't want to stay home and see my parents' disappointment. Instead, I took a walk along the quiet riverside, trying to sort through the overwhelming emotions that had come with my rebirth. Before long, I found myself near Ryan's military base. Memories flooded my mind, memories of the days when my heart had been completely filled with Ryan. The base wasn't far from home, yet after enlisting, he rarely came back. I never knew if it was because he was too focused on serving his country, or if he was simply avoiding me. Whenever he did visit, I would prepare for days in advance. I would wear my best dress, carefully braid my hair into 2 glossy black plaits, and pack my bag with sunflower seeds I had roasted myself, along with homemade pastries filled with my affection. Every time I saw him, I was both nervous and excited, too blinded by my emotions to notice the growing disdain in his eyes. Looking back now, I found it laughable. Just as I was about to turn away, I noticed something in the distance. Ryan was walking side by side with a woman. She had a graceful figure, and her floral dress hugged her curves in all the right places. Her long, jet-black hair cascaded down her shoulders, smooth and silky. Their hands were tightly intertwined, and when they looked at each other, their eyes were filled with intimacy and affection. It was her, Emily Shaw, the woman who had inserted herself into my marriage and haunted my life in my past existence. This was the perfect opportunity. I steadied my emotions and walked toward them, stopping right in front of them. Ryan, since when do you fix radios by the river? His face turned deathly pale. As if burned, he instantly pulled his hand away from Emily's. His brows knitted together as he looked at me. Jessica, didn't I tell you to wait for me at home? Why are you here? Were you following me? I let out a light, mocking laugh. Is this road your private property? If I hadn't happened to pass by, I would have never understood why you suddenly wanted to withdraw the marriage request. Ryan froze, a flicker of guilt flashing in his eyes. Jessica, you're misunderstanding things. Postponing the wedding is between us. It has nothing to do with Emily. Emily tugged gently at Ryan's arm, putting on her usual innocent act. Her voice was soft, delicate, as if it could melt into water. Ryan, please don't argue with Jessica because of me. I don't want to see you upset. Anger surged in my chest, and I let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. Wow, what a performance. You really don't know that he's engaged? And yet here you are, acting all innocent and pitiful. Do you have no shame? Emily's eyes immediately welled up with tears as she turned to Ryan, her voice trembling. Ryan, did she misunderstand something? I only see you as a good friend. In my past life, she had played this same game, pushing Ryan away just enough while always keeping him close. Yet, every time, she managed to blur the lines between us. Ryan immediately stepped in front of Emily, shielding her from me, and spoke with displeasure. Jessica Carter, watch your words. There's nothing improper between Emily and me. I widened my eyes deliberately and raised my voice. Nothing improper? You were holding hands. Does that still count as nothing improper? I scoffed. Ryan, do you take me for a naive 13-year-old? I'm your fiancé. Do you think this is fair to me after all these years? I had always been submissive in front of Ryan, but for once I stood my ground. He was so taken aback that he couldn't find the words to respond. A few onlookers, nosy ants who had been straining their ears to listen, exchanged meaningful glances. Though they couldn't hear every word, their animated expressions and pointing fingers made it clear they had already spun their own version of events. In no time, our little scene would spread across town as the juiciest gossip. Emily, probably worried that word would get out about her meddling in a military engagement, leaned slightly against Ryan and whispered, Ryan and I have been close since school. I've always depended on him. It's my fault. I didn't mean to make you misunderstand our relationship. I let out a cold chuckle. Misunderstand? The way you two are acting, anyone with eyes can see what's going on. If you were open about it, I might have even respected your so-called true love. But this, pretending to be innocent while sneaking around, you want to be the mistress and still wear a halo of virtue? Emily's face turned red, and tears welled up in her eyes. Jessica, nothing happened between Ryan and me. How could you say such things about me? In front of Ryan, she was always the helpless victim, the delicate flower. But behind his back, she had sneered at me more times than I could count. You have nothing to offer, just a backwater girl clinging onto Ryan. What makes you think he'd ever want to marry you? And to think you even followed him to the base, begging to be a military wife. How shameless can you be? You and your family think just because they saved Ryan's grandfather, he owes you a lifetime of gratitude? How pathetic. Poor people like you don't matter. If you die, you die. In my past life, I had endured it all. I had swallowed my pride, convinced that if I just held on a little longer, Ryan would come to appreciate me. Not this time. Ryan's face darkened with anger. Jessica Carter, you're crossing the line. I withdrew the marriage request because of my military responsibilities. I needed more time to think about the right timing for our wedding. Stop trying to pin this on Emily. We're not as dirty as you think. His voice grew colder. You're getting out of control. I want you to apologize to Emily right now. Emily wiped away her tears, but in her eyes I saw the glint of triumph. In my past life, whenever Emily and I clashed, Ryan had always taken her side. I had cried, telling him she had provoked me first, but he never believed me. He never imagined that his elegant, gentle white moonlight could say such cruel words. Now, she was playing the same game again, pretending to stop him, playing the role of the kind-hearted woman. Ryan, it's all my fault. Don't be mad at Jessica, she murmured softly. I stepped past Ryan and pointed directly at Emily. Shut up. Stop pretending to be the victim when you're the one ruining someone else's relationship. You make me sick. I had never dared to speak to Ryan like this before. His expression twisted in rage. Jessica Carter, if you won't apologize, then get out of my sight. I won't marry a vulgar, disrespectful woman like you. I laughed mockingly. Don't worry, Ryan, you won't have to see me ever again. His body tensed. For the first time, a flicker of panic crossed his face. What do you mean? It means exactly what you wanted. My voice was steady. Ours was just a childhood engagement, never formalized. Let's call it off. I'm done lying to myself. You don't owe me anything. You don't have to force yourself to marry me out of gratitude to your grandfather. You and Emily can be together. I won't stand in your way. From this moment on, our engagement is over. We have nothing to do with each other. From now on, you walk your path, and I'll walk mine. With that, I turned and walked away without looking back. In my past life, I had watched Ryan's back disappear too many times. This time, it was my turn to leave first. 2 nights later, in the middle of a restless sleep, I was startled awake by a knocking sound at my window. I already knew who it was. After all, this wasn't the first time. Not wanting to wake the neighbors and give them something to gossip about, I quietly opened the window, allowing Ryan to climb inside. His gaze was deep and intense, locking onto me as if there were 1,000 words he wanted to say but couldn't. That look, he had looked at me the same way in my past life. Back then, I had been foolish enough to believe it meant he had feelings for me, that he held a deep, unspoken attachment. Time and time again, I had fallen for it. I dug my nails into my thigh, grounding myself in reality. I wouldn't fall for it again. I looked at him coldly. What are you doing here? Ryan grabbed my wrist and lowered his voice. I heard from the community director that you're giving up your enlistment. I nodded. I have no interest in joining. I'd rather not trouble the organization. I thought he would be pleased. After all, he had been waiting for me to give up my spot for Emily Shaw. But instead, his face darkened instantly. Jessica Carter, what's the meaning of this? First, you give up enlisting, then you break off our engagement? You've had your fun, but enough is enough. A sharp, mocking smile tugged at my lips. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? I give up the enlistment spot for Emily, step aside as your fiancé, and now you two can live happily ever after in the military, the golden couple of the regiment. Ryan hadn't expected me to lay it all out so bluntly. He awkwardly rubbed the tip of his nose. What nonsense are you spouting? I already promised Grandpa that once things settle down at the base, I'll marry you. Before that, I was planning to make sure you got pregnant. The position of Mrs. Lawrence has always been yours. You don't need to play these little games just to get my attention. He paused and added in a cold tone. There are already rumors going around. Emily has been feeling terrible these past 2 days. I don't want this kind of gossip affecting her. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. I lowered my head slightly, hiding the sudden sting in my eyes. So that was it. He hadn't come because he cared about me. He had come because he didn't want Emily to suffer from public scrutiny. I lifted my head and looked at him directly. Ryan, you don't love me. So why are you marrying me? It was the question I had wanted to ask in my past life, but never had the courage to. His expression stiffened for a moment before he frowned impatiently. Love? What does love have to do with this? Our engagement was arranged long ago, by our parents, by the elders. I never had a choice in the matter. I fell silent for a moment before speaking slowly. Ryan, chasing after you for so many years has been exhausting. I don't want to do it anymore. I took a deep breath. I always thought we would stay together, that we would eventually become husband and wife. But now I realize that was just my own wishful thinking. Ryan didn't say a word, his lips pressing into a thin line. I inhaled deeply and met his gaze. Leave. Don't come looking for me again. Let's go our separate ways. For a brief moment, the air between us felt heavy. Then I heard Ryan scoff. Fine, let's end it here. I just hope you don't regret what you said tonight. With that, he turned and jumped out the window, slamming it shut behind him. His departure didn't stir a single ripple in my heart. I turned off my bedside lamp and lay back down, willing myself to sleep. If it weren't for our engagement, someone like Ryan, privileged, destined for success, would have never crossed paths with someone like me. We were meant to be on separate paths, parallel lines that should have never intertwined. I never had a place in his heart in my past life. I wouldn't have one in this life either. As long as I didn't cling to him, we would have nothing to do with each other from now on. From this moment forward, I would take full advantage of my second chance. I would focus on making money. The era of economic reform was right around the corner. This time, I wouldn't waste my life chasing after love. I would fight for my own future. Ryan's leave ended soon after, and he returned to his unit. Meanwhile, I woke before dawn every day and headed to the factory, weaving between rows of towering textile machines, keeping a close watch on their operation. I couldn't afford to slack off for even a moment. During every break, I sought out experienced workers to learn from, absorbing their techniques like a sponge. Neighbors and coworkers whispered behind my back. They thought I was foolish. Has Jessica Carter lost her mind? She gave up the chance to be a military officer's wife just to work as a factory girl. Old Carter must be furious. No matter how well she works, she'll only ever be a senior laborer at best. How could that compare to the honor of being married to a regiment commander's family? They hadn't been reborn like I had. They couldn't see what I could see. By 1984, the country would begin reducing government-mandated production quotas. By the late 1980s, China would become the world's largest textile powerhouse. The growth of private enterprises would surge. Right now, people's clothing choices were still limited: simple materials, plain colors, modest designs. But in the future, textiles wouldn't just serve basic needs. They would cater to individual expression, fashion, and functionality. I planned to stay in the factory for a few years, mastering my craft. When the country's economy took off at full speed, I would be ready to ride the wave. With my knowledge from my past life, I would carve out my own success. That morning, on my way to work, I took my usual path along the riverbank. The crisp air was peaceful until an unexpected sound shattered the quiet. A loud, snorting noise. I turned my head just in time to see a massive black pig leaping off a military transport truck. It had broken free from its handlers and was now charging straight toward me. Panicked, I spun around and ran. But the pig was relentless, chasing after me with astonishing speed. Behind it, a soldier had jumped down from the truck and was in hot pursuit. So now, it was me running, the pig chasing me and the soldier chasing the pig. We tore along the riverbank in a ridiculous, chaotic scene. Then my foot slipped. With a loud splash, I fell into the icy river. The freezing water swallowed me whole, soaking through my clothes in an instant. I flailed, struggling to stay afloat, despair clawing at my chest. Had I really fought so hard to be reborn, only to die because of a runaway pig? The river water was murky and filled with debris, making it difficult to breathe. My arms thrashed, but all I grasped were handfuls of slippery weeds. Just as I thought I was doomed, the soldier chasing the pig saw me fall. Without a second of hesitation, he dove into the river. In just a few strokes, he reached me. His strong arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me toward the shore. By the time we reached land, I was a soaking, shivering mess. My clothes clung to me, outlining every curve. The soldier, who was equally drenched, quickly wrung out his long coat and handed it to me. He scratched his head awkwardly and looked away, clearly flustered. "Comrade, I'm really sorry. The pig got loose. I didn't mean to scare you," he muttered. I had been about to snap at him until I got a clear look at his face. I froze. A strange, complicated emotion stirred in my chest. I had met him once before. It was over 40 years ago. Well, in my past life. At the time, Ryan had grown tired of me after our marriage. His letters became colder, and then one day he wrote to say he wanted a divorce. I had been desperate, lost. With nothing but a small bag, I took 3 different trains, traveling 2,000 kilometers over 3 days and 2 nights to reach his base in the south. But Ryan refused to see me. Instead, he sent a message through someone else. "This marriage isn't working. We see things too differently. This isn't good for either of us. Let's end it and find our own peace." I never even saw his face. Hungry, exhausted, and heartbroken, I collapsed outside the barracks. That was when this soldier passed by. He had been carrying a simple meal, and, seeing my pitiful state, handed me 2 steamed buns. He even helped me find a guest house that didn't require an official referral. Later, I learned he was a cook in Ryan's unit. His name was Adam Hunt. He was smart and hardworking, but had come from a poor family. After finishing middle school, he had enlisted to build a better future for himself. And now, in this life, we had crossed paths again. Was this fate? I suddenly felt an unexpected warmth toward him. I bit my lip, shivering from the cold. You're the one raising that pig, and you didn't even keep an eye on it. This matter can't be brushed off so easily. Adam scratched his head again, looking genuinely remorseful. You're right, it was my fault. I'll make sure that pig is properly trained. I didn't mean to cause you any trouble. I narrowed my eyes at him, lips quirking into a smirk. And what about my dignity? You saw everything. Adam tensed. His hands fidgeted at the hem of his soaked uniform, his ears turning red. I didn't do it on purpose, he stammered. So, what do you want me to do about it? I'll do whatever you say. A proper young woman should know how to be reserved. If word got out about this, the whole neighborhood would start gossiping again. How could I possibly face anyone after that? I bit my lip, trying to suppress the smile threatening to break free. Adam Hunt was an honest man, so honest that he didn't even dare look at me directly. His voice was flustered as he stammered. Don't listen to what other people say. I'll take responsibility for this. When I was reborn, my only goal was to focus on my career and avoid getting entangled in love. But fate had a way of working itself into my plans. As our eyes met, something subtle yet undeniable stirred between us. Despite only meeting a few times during his leave, those brief interactions were enough for me to make up my mind. I wanted to spend my life with Adam. Resources were scarce, yet every time he saw me, he would use his own meal tickets to buy me a full serving of rice and multiple dishes. Whenever there was meat, he wouldn't hesitate to put all of it into my bowl, leaving only the vegetables for himself. Jessica, eat more. You've gotten so thin. His gaze was filled with nothing but warmth and tenderness, the kind I had never once seen in Ryan Lawrence's eyes. Adam came from a poor family. His parents, hardworking laborers, had struggled just to put food on the table. But through sheer perseverance and dedication, he had managed to stand out among his peers, excelling in every selection process within the military. That evening, we took a quiet walk along a narrow path. He seemed hesitant at first, but after a brief pause, he finally said, Jessica, our unit is being relocated to the south soon. After that, it'll be nearly impossible for us to see each other. I stiffened, thinking he was about to say we should stop seeing each other. But then he took a deep breath and, with unwavering sincerity, said, Why don't we get married? You can come with me as my wife. That way, we won't have to be separated. Relief flooded through me. I nodded vigorously. Yes. Adam beamed, and the very next day, he returned to his unit to submit our marriage application. News of our engagement spread like wildfire. When I told my parents that I was marrying Adam, the shock hit them like a boulder thrown into a still pond, creating ripples that quickly turned into an uproar. Are you out of your mind? My mother's eyes widened in disbelief, her face a mix of fury and exasperation. You're giving up a regiment commander for a butcher? Mom, Adam is a soldier too. A commander may have status, but Ryan Lawrence never cared about me. He didn't respect you or Dad either. Adam may be a cook, but I believe in his abilities. He's going to achieve great things one day. Most importantly, he truly cares for me. When I'm with him, I feel secure. Secure? You think that's security? My mother's voice rose. He spends all day with knives, cutting meat. He's either a butcher or a cook. What future does he have? Can he even compare to Ryan? You're ruining your life. My father paced the room angrily, his pipe clanking against the floor with every step. Soon, the entire neighborhood caught wind of my decision. At the street corner, Mrs. Wong sat on her small stool, plucking vegetables as she chatted with the other women. Has Jessica lost her mind? A regiment commander, every girl in town dreams of marrying a man like that. But she? Not only did she break off the engagement, she's rushing to marry a butcher. Who knows what spell he cast on her? Mrs. Jiang shook her head in disapproval. I just don't understand. What is she thinking? Then, as if relishing the drama, Mrs. Wong's rival, Mrs. Liu, leaned in conspiratorially. You all don't know the real story. Jessica's reputation isn't clean. Word is, someone already saw everything. You think a regiment commander would still want her after that? She had to find someone to marry before it was too late. When my parents heard this, they were furious. My father stormed outside and got into a heated argument with Mrs. Liu, swearing that if she dared spread more lies, he would shut her mouth himself. Desperate to change my mind, my parents locked me in my room. My mother's voice was weary as she pleaded from outside my door. Jessica, listen to me. End things with that butcher. We can still go back to the Lawrences and talk it over. It's not too late. Ryan soon heard about my engagement. I could imagine the mix of frustration and bruised pride brewing inside him. He deliberately took leave and even brought his adjutant along, just to come and see the spectacle for himself. Standing in my family's living room, he looked at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. So it's true. You're really marrying Adam Hunt? He let out a dry chuckle. Well, that's certainly a surprise. I thought you broke off our engagement to marry a CEO, not a butcher. Ryan sneered. Tell me, what does he have that I don't? I'm a regiment commander, and he's just some guy who slaughters pigs and cooks meals. Did the smell of grease and smoke mess with your head? His voice was deliberately raised, dripping with arrogance and mockery. Your taste is truly one of a kind. Giving up the chance to be a respected officer's wife just to live an oily, grimy life with a cook. I listened to Ryan's sharp-edged ridicule, but my expression remained composed. I lifted my chin slightly and countered with an icy calmness. Ryan Lawrence, you've spent too much time on your high horse, thinking that status can buy anything. But I'm not someone who chases after power. What Adam gives me is something you will never understand, and frankly, you don't deserve to comment on it. Ryan's face twisted with rage. You'll regret this one day, he spat before storming out. But I knew Ryan too well. He wasn't acting this way because he cared about me. His pride had simply been wounded. Not long after Ryan left, Adam arrived. He had changed into his neatly pressed military uniform and was carrying a carefully selected assortment of pastries and fresh pork from the market. Standing at my family's doorstep, he hesitated for a moment before knocking, clearly nervous. My parents greeted him with cold expressions, and he swallowed hard, but he still mustered the courage to speak. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I understand that you have concerns about me and Jessica. It was wrong of me not to visit sooner, and I take full responsibility for that. But I love Jessica, and I sincerely want to marry her. His voice was steady, his sincerity evident. My position may not be high, but my salary is enough for us to live on. I'll give Jessica everything I have and let her manage our household. I know I can't compare to a regiment commander in rank, but I have a genuine heart, and I can give her a real, honest life. Please trust me, just give me a chance. Adam's eyes were filled with earnest determination. I could see the tension in my parents slowly soften, though they didn't say a word. But I knew they had silently given their approval. Not long after, our marriage request was officially approved. There was no grand ceremony, no luxurious wedding gown. We stood in the small military chapel, with red paper decorations bearing the word happiness plastered on the walls. Adam wore his crisp formal uniform, and I dressed in a simple red dress. Hand in hand, we stood before our comrades, exchanging gazes filled with hope and commitment for the future. And just like that, we stepped into marriage, determined to stand by each other through the tides of history. Shortly after the wedding, Adam's unit was relocated to the south, and I followed him to Deep City. But unlike other military wives, I didn't settle into a quiet life of caring for my husband and raising children. I had my own dreams to chase. In my past life, I had visited Deep City a few times when it had already become a top-tier metropolis, known worldwide for its prosperity. But over 40 years ago, it was just a small fishing village. Adam worried that I would feel wronged by our new surroundings. But I wasn't discouraged, because I knew the 1980s would mark the beginning of an economic revolution. This city would soon become the frontier of China's rapid development, a land bursting with opportunity. I had already made plans for what I would do in Deep City. Of course, I would return to my roots, the textile industry. Even within the military family compound, I had already built a reputation for my skill and ambition. One evening, as we sat together, I finally brought up the future. Adam, do you really plan to stay in the kitchen forever? He hesitated, scratching his head. I do my job well in the mess hall. Besides, getting into a military academy isn't easy. Of course, it's not easy, I agreed. But how will you know if you can do it if you don't try? People with real ambition are always working to improve themselves. Are you really content spending your life surrounded by nothing but smoke and grease? Under my persistent encouragement, Adam finally picked up his books and started studying again. And in the end, hard work paid off. Adam was successfully admitted into a military academy. During the years he was in school, I gave birth to our daughter. With Adam away, the full weight of taking care of our child and managing our household fell on my shoulders. But this time, love didn't weaken me. It gave me strength. The 1980s were filled with both challenges and opportunities. I never allowed myself a moment of rest. In our small one-bedroom home, I juggled caring for our young child while mapping out my business plans in my head. My only tool was an old sewing machine, a treasure I had picked up from a second-hand market, and the very thing that would carry me toward my dream. During the day, I strapped my baby to my back and searched the city for affordable fabric suppliers. At night, I worked tirelessly at my sewing machine, cutting and stitching. I carefully studied the latest fashion magazines from Hong Kong, analyzing the newest designs and figuring out how to incorporate trendy elements into my own textile creations. Whenever I faced technical difficulties, I sought out experienced tailors and learned from them. At first, I could only sell my handmade textiles within the military family compound or at small street stalls. Sales were slow, and the response wasn't as promising as I had hoped. But I didn't give up. I continuously improved my craftsmanship and refined the quality of my products. Gradually, people started noticing. Customers were drawn to my unique designs and fine workmanship. Orders began increasing, and eventually, I rented a small workshop and hired a few workers. My little business started thriving. Around the same time, Adam graduated from military school. Like a rocket ignited, his career took off. Armed with the solid foundation he had built at the academy and his relentless drive, he quickly made a name for himself in the military. Starting from the bottom, he led every mission with courage and precision. His unit was disciplined and well-trained, excelling in both military drills and real-life operations. With each success, he climbed higher in rank. Years later, I attended a military event and unexpectedly ran into someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Emily Shaw. She caught sight of me, but instead of greeting me, she quickly averted her gaze and hurried away. It wasn't until I spoke with some of the other military wives that I learned what had happened to her over the years. Apparently, Ryan had suffered a severe leg injury in an accident a few years ago. He received a military compensation payout and was discharged, given a desk job in the civilian sector. But Emily, deciding that he was no longer worthy of her, divorced him. Shortly after, she latched onto a high-ranking officer, a middle-aged widower, and the two were soon engaged. For a time, she thought she had secured an unshakable position, throwing her weight around in the military performance troupe and offending nearly everyone around her. But fate had other plans. For reasons unknown, her engagement was suddenly called off, and the officer married someone else. Emily, now cast aside, became an outcast in the performance troupe, never receiving another opportunity to shine. As for Ryan, his civilian job didn't last long. Due to a critical error in judgment, he caused a major financial loss for the government and was dismissed from his position. Ryan had been a golden child his entire life, never once experiencing failure. But after a series of crushing blows, he completely withdrew from the world, cutting ties with his former comrades and subordinates. The military wives sighed at his downfall. But I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity. Everything he and Emily had suffered, they had brought upon themselves. If anything, I thought their punishment wasn't nearly enough. The years passed, and soon the 21st century arrived. Through relentless effort and ambition, I expanded my textile business from a small workshop into a major enterprise. Not only were my products popular across the country, but they were also exported overseas. With the advantage of my knowledge from my past life, I capitalized on market gaps and opportunities, amassing a fortune worth billions. I became one of the most well-known entrepreneurs in the textile industry. Adam, now in his 60s, remained strong and dignified. His presence had only grown more commanding with age. In his crisp, pressed military uniform, the shining insignia on his shoulders symbolized his high-ranking status. Yet every time he was with me, all the authority and prestige melted away, replaced by nothing but tenderness. Through the ever-changing years, we stood by each other's side, supporting, understanding, and cherishing one another. Whether through hardships or moments of joy, we weathered every storm together, hand in hand, season after season. With Adam beside me, our wise and accomplished daughter, and our adorable granddaughter, my life was full and complete. It had been decades since I last thought about Ryan Lawrence. Until that day. Adam and I were driving with our granddaughter, taking her to the park. As we approached the parking lot, an old man hobbled out of the security booth, holding up a QR code for us to scan and pay the parking fee. Our eyes met. For a moment, both Ryan and I froze in place. Adam had long since forgotten that I had once been engaged to Ryan in my youth. He didn't recognize the frail, unkempt old man standing before us, nor could he ever imagine that this disheveled figure had once been the proud and commanding Captain Lawrence. Without a second thought, Adam calmly scanned the code and paid the fee. The parking barrier lifted, and our car slowly pulled away. In the back seat, our granddaughter chattered excitedly, her tiny voice filling the air. Adam responded to her every question with infinite patience, his voice warm and gentle. Through the rearview mirror, I caught a final glimpse of Ryan, still standing there, unmoving, staring after our car as we disappeared into the distance. This time, it was truly the last goodbye.